Hey everybody, this is Freddy with Leviathan Scuba.com. How do you choose the right BCD for you? Well, whether you're a seasoned diver or you're a brand new beginner doing research, we have information you've never heard before. We'll get to that in just a minute. You know what? We just got done filming how to choose a BCD. It was really good, but it was really long. Angela thought it was really long. Sheldon fell asleep during the filming. I'm just saying. I know on YouTube it's kind of hard to watch really long videos. So you know what we did? We just cut it up into the different sections that made sense. Separate videos, standalone videos, but check them out. And then we'll produce the whole long one if you feel like, you need something to help you fall asleep at night. So how do you choose a BCD? Well, there's a lot of factors. We're going to get into them. But I want to start by saying you don't see like top 10 lists from me of the best BCDs out there, because how could you really ever choose? How could I choose for you which the best BCD is? Because really it comes down to the features and the functions and the style of diving and all those things we're going to get into to determine that. I don't know that I could get down to that and highlight 10 BCs out of the world of BCDs. So I could even tell you my favorite BCD. You might not even like it. And guess what? Next year I just might find another one. Okay? So there's a lot of different decisions and choices to determine, right? The number one BCD for you, but you're the best person to make those decisions. So I'm just going to educate. That's my job. I'm not going to sell, I'm going to educate, right? We're going to start with the history of BCDs. This is just kind of an interesting tidbit of trivia out there, right? So did you know that the Buoyancy Compensator Device has nothing to do with attaining neutral buoyancy when it was invented? Nothing at all, right? The basics of a BCD are just a harness and a bladder. That's it. Every BCD made is a variation of that. And did you know that fish use a BCD? What the heck do I mean by that? Right? Well, it's called a swim bladder, but it does exactly the same thing. They can expand it or they can contract it, and it does the same thing. Expand it, they become more buoyant if they need to be. Contract it, and they sink a little bit, okay? So I want to start by saying, really, a BCD's first function is it's a safety device, right? But today, so many people don't think of it so much that way. They think of it more like a tool, right? But it was invented to help keep a downed pilot or a sailor afloat until they could be rescued, okay? The BCD can be traced back to 1928. That's when the very first ones were starting to be used. They called them a PFD back then, a personal flotation device. And it was actually nicknamed, if you Google it, the Mae West, right? It was the first inflatable life preserver. It was invented by Peter Marcus, who patented the design, and it was first used for military, pilots, and sailors, right? Purely emergency flotation, okay? It was actually issued gear in World War II, and it saved many, many lives. Now, kind of a fun little fact that if you were saved by a PFD, in other words, you went overboard or your plane had to ditch and you had to inflate your PFD, and then you were rescued, you became part of a special club. It was called the Goldfish Club. This is a patch from World War II showing that you could wear on your uniform that you were part of the Goldfish Club. And there's a more modern design. Okay? So the military divers, even though it was a little bit in its infancy, they adopted and they improved the Mae West vest for use underwater. Okay? It was still used for emergency purposes, for flotation, and didn't help with buoyancy control at all back then. But it was something they could wear when they were floating in the water, waiting for the boat to come get them, things like that. Now, the earliest versions, this is from my collection, the earliest versions were orally inflated, but they were kind of difficult to remove air from. You basically had to take it off and squeeze it, or try to squeeze these things and hold this at the same time to get air out of them. That's why they were never used for neutral buoyancy, they were just used to float on the surface. And with the tube being in the middle, all the air would come up here too. You would just pull this down and then blow it up, and that would be your flotation, okay? Then there was gas-operated versions that were invented. They made it a little bit easier. They put a CO2 cartridge inside the vest, right? And it had a little pull tab that you could just pull down, and the CO2 cartridge would fill the vest all the way up. Again, you can see how that's pretty much only for emergency safety use, because you couldn't adjust how much air was in there or not. You couldn't dump it very easy, that sort of thing, okay? So if you inflated it while you were underwater, it was always completely in front of the diver, right? So it'd pull the diver's head up towards the surface, and you couldn't maintain a horizontal profile. You can see this photo here. Can you imagine scuba diving and adding air to that, being in front of you and or top towards your head, right? So the horse collar is what it was called. It was a derivative of those early military ones. You can see how the hose is starting to go to the top. It's beginning to be dumpable, right? And in 1957, the Navy Experimental Diving Unit, they improved on the horse collar by adding a separate gas bottle. You can see that down at the very bottom, okay? Still didn't make it very easy to use. All the flotation was in front of you, and they were pretty much all orange, so you could see them from the air if you were a rescuing plane, right? So still an emergency safety device primarily. 1969. That's when Waverly Air Products, they sold a controlled buoyancy jacket. Okay, it was commercially produced and it was actually sold in dive shops. And that was still the horse collar design. They called it a jacket at the time, but it was still basically what people thought of as a BCD at the time. But you could dump some air, you could add some air, and the beginning of neutral buoyancy adjustment had begun. Okay, so they call the ABLJ. You notice all these acronyms. We still use it today, right? BCD, Buoyancy Compensation Device. Some people call it a buoyancy control device. But in reality, it was a safety vest, right? So they never called it compensation for buoyancy. That was the first commercial name used for the jacket style that we know of today. The BCD with a push button inflator. It attached to the scuba diving regulator. That wasn't invented until the 1970s, okay? You can see there, I believe that one is a Scuba Pro, and it has the push button inflator, comes towards the top. It's still in the front. There's still quite a bit of air behind you up at the neck, okay? But it is more easily adjusted and now becomes useful for attaining neutral buoyancy because you could adjust while you're underwater. You could dump some air, you could add some air, okay? Very slow to catch on, really, even though invented in the 1970s, it wasn't really until the 1980s that people started using that style, okay? And that's actually coincidentally a time when scuba diving started to catch on more as a sport that anyone could do. You didn't need to be, you know, this super fit guy or girl that, you know, just participated in these sports. It started to become commercially available and expanding. Dive shops were popping up around the country and that sort of thing. The very first jacket style that was actually made and sold commercially was the ADV, the Advanced Design Vest. It was made by Sequest, okay, and it is the basic design that is still used today. What? Okay, yeah, all right. She says that was a good video, but there's a lot more to come that's even better. Check out part 2.
You know why we do these videos? Hopefully they will help make you a better diver, keep you in the sport longer, help you share your passion with others. And if you can think of anyone else that might benefit from these, why don't you share it with them? You know how you can help us? Hit that like button down below. And if by some chance you haven't subscribed already, hit the subscribe button and we'll let you know when the next one comes out. Have a great day.